Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Justin Fitzpatrick. Good to see you, Justin.
And good to see you, Julian.
Now you're on the other side of the world in the US of A. I'm just going to introduce you so people know who you are. They might already know who you are. Justin Fitzpatrick, you are a former Irish international rugby player. You've earned 26 caps and won the Heineken Cup with Ulster in 1999, I should say, part of the historic European triumph. After your career ended through injury, you sort of reinvented yourself as a coach, and you worked with teams from Ireland to Pakistan to the US, and then you've become a head coach of the Houston SaberCats in Major League Rugby, and now you're a business CEO and created the Resilient Leaders Playbook, helping leaders apply elite sports lessons to build resilient organizations. And today we're going to be exploring, I suppose, from your perspective, from your career in rugby, but also to now, what resilience means to you, Justin. Before we get into that conversation, I'd just like to ask, what do you love about what you do?
What's not to love? I mean, I love building things, helping others grow, express themselves, building teams, taking things to market, multiple different things. So yeah, I feel very privileged. The sort of journey, and you sort of touched upon it, that I've had over my adult career, and and still loving life and growing, challenging myself, and doing different things.
Fantastic, sounds great. And it's great to hear that you're still growing and learning and developing new things in yourself, which I think is one great thing to do in life, isn't it? Continue to never think you've arrived.
100%. Life is a journey, not a destination. And when you stop and you stagnate. So I think it's good to keep yourself busy. It's good to challenge yourself. It's good to get a little bit uncomfortable, branching out to things that are new and different. While keeping going with things that feed your soul. And I think that makes for an interesting life.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about resilience today. I think your career sort of shows there's a lot of resilience in that, in terms of all the potential setbacks you would have had throughout that time. But I just want to almost start with what's your definition of resilience? How do you sort of frame resilience from your perspective?
I would say it's probably the capacity to adapt, to stay useful, even compound, skills under pressure. And I think, you touched upon it there. I think when you're an athlete, you're under that sort of micro scope of eyes, whether it's your teammates, your coach, fans, the press, family, etc., etc. They're all often from good places in their hearts, and sometimes not, depending where the feedback's coming from. You're under that microscope, and you have to learn very, very quick to develop a thick skin and to be resilient. You're challenged mentally, physically, emotionally, daily, weekly, to lesser or greater extent. So, that's certainly a great grounding, I think, for resilience, and certainly gave me many advantages in life, having sort of been through that cauldron.
And you would have faced, I'm sure, in your career, many sort of defeats, injuries. Perhaps you weren't selected for a team. It'd be just good to understand, for you to walk us through, I suppose, a low point in your career, in your rugby career, and the mental processes, how you used that to sort of navigate that and overcome that and bounce back and move forward in that moment.
For sure. I mean, we have a little saying in Ulster, where I spent a large part of my playing career. 1 week you're cock of the walk, and the next week you're the feather duster. So there's a lot of highs and lows in sport. When you're playing, every week, during the season, or not playing every week, right? If you've been dropped, or you're on the bench, or you're out of the squad, or you're injured, so that happens it's part of the life, and if you can't handle that, then it's not the life for you. But for me and many others, I loved the life. I loved competing. I loved rugby. I love sport. I love the challenge of it all. So you learn to be resilient, to take those knocks as they come, to be constantly looking to be better. When you're at the top of your game, looking for those little advantages to help you stay there. And when you're on the outside looking in, staying curious, keeping positive, working hard so that you can get back into the jersey.
And was there any particular memory of a time when it was pretty, I don't know, it felt brutal, whether it was an injury, whether it was a defeat or whatever it may be, and you thought, I don't know, what sort of process did you go through in your head? If there's a leader listening right now thinking, I've just had a real setback in my career or setback in my business, what would you do to sort of help navigate and overcome those difficulties? What sort of things you need to think about?
Yeah, I mean, I love to read. I love history, and there's one little quote that always sticks to mind, and it's a Churchill quote. And he said, "If it's not fatal, it's not final." And that always has always sort of helped me through. I mean, in the moment when you've been dropped or you're injured or you're not playing well or the team's losing, there could be a myriad of different things. And I say it's a roller coaster of emotions, and it's never as good as you think it is at the top, and it's never as bad as you think it is when you're at the bottom. It's taking a deep breath, giving yourself some context to what's happening, making a plan. I think that's incredibly important. Learning what's happening, recognizing it, name it, and then you can work you can work your way out of it.
And when we often watch a lot of sport, don't we? Whether it's football, rugby, and sort of team sports, and we see England who are playing perhaps, and we see them slightly behind the pace. They're down 1-0, and you feel for them, but obviously the team is feeling like they're actually doing it. And you must have been in some rugby matches where you were down, and then managed to pull it back. How as a team did you sort of manage that energy? And because it's quite difficult, isn't it? You might be okay, but the rest of the team, and what sort of things with a coach, and obviously you're a coach as well, how did you help rally and keep people pushing forward and continue to keep going?
Well, I mean, ultimately, the game's not won until the final whistle's blown. So many things can happen. You could be down in the, leak 2 or 3 tries in the first 20 minutes, but there's still 60 minutes left to play. So you come back to your processes, and comes back to the plan that you've made, and having trust in what you've agreed to do in that week, the foundations that you agreed in pre-season, comes back to what you individually can contribute in that moment and in the next moment, and then it's I love the Kaizen philosophy, the incremental improvements, right? So what can I control in this moment? I've just missed a tackle. Okay, well, I can dwell on that, and people do, and you see that, and they compound errors during a game when they've made one mistake and they go on and make another 2 or 3. But if nothing can bring back the mistake that you've made, and everybody makes mistakes. And I think that's something you learn as you become more resilient, that it is just part of life. And, so contributing on what I can do next to help the team. What is my role? What is my function? And that's the same whether you're a CEO, middle management, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach. Okay, all right. We'll discuss the mistake in the review, but what can we do now to contribute? And I think that comes also sort of segues nicely on. We talk about a lot reviewing things, having postmortems both in sport and business after the effect. But the best environments I've been in have pre-mortems, in so much as they're looking, okay, we're going into this game, we've looked at what the opposition brings to it, or we're going to market and this is our product, what are the competitors looking to do, and you work through that plan A, plan B, what could go wrong, what would we do if this happens, what's our plan C, etc., and that builds capacity and I think mental resilience individually and collectively.
Yeah, I think scenario planning is incredibly vital, because if you've, whether you're a rugby player or in business, if you've scenarioed some options that could go right or wrong, in terms of navigating some difficulty, when you're in the moment and things like that happen, actually you can very quickly, can't you, build that strategy or go for that strategy to help overcome. And I'm sure, when you're up against in rugby a certain team, you might put some sort of scenarios in of, we're going to be down this point. What would we do? How do we go through? And it goes back to that game plan. Doesn't go back to the process. It goes back to, control the controllables. It's that sort of, sounds very basic stuff, but we often lose those basics, don't we, of how we operate.
For sure, absolutely, and there's good reason for that. Nobody likes to be put under pressure, but pressure's part of life. So the more that you can plan for things that go wrong and what can go right, again, you're not looking to predict the future, but if we can plan out a good portion of the things that could affect us, then we're going to be much more resilient when those things, and if those things present themselves.
And if things are all going a little bit Pete Tong expected, often our amygdala, our sort of fight or flight brain sort of kicks in and gets all a little bit emotional, and we know logic doesn't, it almost disconnects from the prefrontal cortex, where all our logic, clarity, good decision making goes on. When that happens in the context of rugby, was there anything you did to almost do any resets? Was there anything like breathing, or I don't know, what did you try and do it, or were you not aware of that sort of stuff in the context of it?
No, I think well, it's like anything in life. I think the more you practice being under pressure, and in terms of preparing for matches, training, you're trying to capture those stresses as much as you can that you're going to be put under within the physical, mental, technical and tactical aspects of the game as much as possible. So that layers upon layers upon layers. But ultimately, as I say, no plan survives contact with the enemy, and things do go wrong, whether it's an injury, the weather, the ref, the opposition bringing something to the party you hadn't considered. There are a myriad of different things. Somebody having an off game, or a unit having an off game, and you've got to deal with that. One of the things that I always thought was very helpful, we had a little call. Someone had made a mistake. They know they've made a mistake. They don't need you to tell them. And there's a time and a place to go through how and why that happened. It's not in the moment. So we used to talk about, if I'd missed a tackle or made a mistake, you'd say to me, next play, right? So that was my reset immediately, not to be dwelling on it, because that just compounds the mistakes, because I'm not in the moment, and allows me to get on to what I can contribute in that moment to help the team get back in shape.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? To almost have those phrases or ways of just getting back into the groove. We'll review this afterwards. We'll do a post-mortem. We'll do a bit of an understand. And we talk about post-mortems. It's interesting, isn't it? I come across a lot of businesses, and I was in businesses, I work myself, that post-mortems or reviews or whatever when you want to call it are not done that often as we should like. I mean, we know in sport it's done quite an awful lot after each game, whether immediately or a few days after. You'll have a review of the game, of everything that's going on, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we learn, build for next time. But in business, bizarrely, it does happen, obviously, but not as happen as often. I don't know if you're finding that in the context of business.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think it's certainly, it is my hypothesis that there's a lot to be learned from sport in business, and probably from business to sport. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that there is a lot more that could be done. Now, obviously, when you're in a season in rugby, you're going, maybe a 6-7 day turnaround from playing. You've obviously got your physical aspects of recovery, treating injuries, doing everything you can do to freshen up and be ready for the next week. But you've also got that mental side of the game, and you've got to get that post-mortem done very, very quickly, because you can't be laboring on. You've got to be moving on to preparing for the next team. It comes thick and fast, so you get very comfortable being uncomfortable, for a better phrase, in terms of looking honestly at what you did or didn't do, what the group did or didn't do, taking that feedback, and filtering it out, so that you can put in place the things that you need to do to improve, especially when you've had a loss, or you've got a tough run of games coming up, and the pressure's building. You've got to have thick skin, and you've got to work it. And I think a lot of that in business is not done because people steer away from having uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's I was always taught, feedback's not positive, it's not negative, it's just feedback. And once you realize that, and you recognize it's a vehicle for you to improve, and obviously there are better and worse ways of doing it, but let's just say it's done in the right way. If I can unpack that, park my ego for a moment, and recognize that this is going to help me, this is going to help the team, which again is going to help me. So it's an important part of the process.
Yeah, it's seeing the bigger picture of why we're diving in, why we're trying to get these insights, why we're talking about this feedback, why we're talking about what's just happened or not happened.
Yeah.
It's really important, isn't it? But as you say, I think in the business context, it does feel uncomfortable because we're not used to those sort of slightly potentially uncomfortable conversations. For sure. And it's comes down to having that growth mindset, right? And if you're in professional sport, it's the competition comes thick and fast, whether it's from the opposition, whether it's internally, and you have to constantly be looking to improve, to be getting better. You can't stand still, and that's a microcosm of life and business. So having that mindset, parking your ego for a moment, listening, however the feedback's delivered, and again, there's good and bad ways of doing it, but either or. What can I learn? What's the message being given to me here? How can I be better? Because, being better helps us improve, helps us rise up the ladder, helps us achieve our aims and objectives, and plow on. And I think it might be just helpful if you could sort of just almost talk us through that process of that review in the context of rugby, whether it's how you would do it or how you've been done in playing for Ireland. Almost just the nitty gritty, because I think people need to understand what goes on in those conversations, how it's done, perhaps the format, and just, I don't know, very briefly just talk about that. I think might be quite helpful for people.
Yeah, I mean, it's done different in different environments with different coaches, just as there are with different leaders in business. It's
We lost
Hello,
you there,
mate.
Justin. That's all right. We
Yeah,
lost you.
yeah, back now. Yeah, just messaging you. I don't know if it was which end it was, but doesn't matter.
No idea. Let's carry on. And you were ranting about how you do, or you've experienced as almost doing that sort of post-mortem reviews after a match, for example.
Yeah, and I was again. I don't know which part we dropped out, but I was saying, look, it's very much style driven, personality driven. Different coaches have their own way of doing things. As the games evolve, there's much more available to coaches as there are to business leaders. But let's stick with the sports context. Whether that's videos, statistics, positional coaches. They can all add in to help develop that picture. And often we've got our own mind's eye of what we did or didn't do, and when we actually see it on tape and it's backed up with facts, it's unquestionable, right? We can roll it back and see how we got there. We don't necessarily have that capacity in business, depending on what type of business it is, but it allows to lay down the narrative, and it doesn't have to be a beat up session. And I found that personally the best environments, both business and sport, do it with a little bit of humor. I think that's important. Not that you just turn that on when you're having this meeting. And I think a fun environment is a productive environment. And you can, when you walk into an office and there's not a sound, or a change room and there's not a sound, that's problematic. You want to hear people comfortable with each other. Laughing and joking, and getting on with their work, but laughing and joking and having the crack with each other, and that allows for that those relationships to develop, and that feedback to be absorbed, from an open-hearted place, if that makes sense, because that leader, whether it's the coach or the CEO or whatever, is not trying to play the blame game, is not trying to beat you up, with what's being said. It's coming from a good place where he, she, everyone, and the person that's receiving it wants to get better, wants to improve.
You talked about getting data or the different perspectives, obviously in the context of rugby or team sport. You have TV and every angle you can get covered, which is we don't have in the world of business. But also obviously there's the perspective of each player, and within that context of that review, is there a real feedback of like peer-to-peer type feedback going on as well, as in what each of the players would have seen but the camera might not have seen, or the detail of that type of thing?
For sure. In the best environments, yeah. I mean, it's positive and negative. It's coming because we have a collective desire to be better. So not addressing because you're my mate that you've missed 4 tackles and you've got, is that a technical issue with your tackling, or is that a positional understanding of the system we're trying to work, or is that just a work ethic thing? I as your teammate and vice versa will have a better idea than the coach, so sometimes that could be me jumping in and saying, well, actually, no, this happened because of, and coming to your defense, or saying, come on, mate, you need to be fitter. Let's stay 10 minutes after the session and do some extras. Let's get you and me do it together. Let's be better. Let's put a plan in place, or whatever it is. Let's do some, X amount of tackles, post training together. Let's build your confidence up, whatever it is. So the really, really good environments are collaborative, and that comes down to culture, which is set at the top. If the if the CEO sees it as hokum, well then everybody at the bottom end and in the middle is going to be hiding and covering their own asses, and not looking to be vulnerable and to be that little bit better, week on week.
I guess we're talking about psychological safety then, in terms of that context of that.
For sure, and and again, look, I'm a former rugby player. It's not sort of hug them out, I mean, it's a big boy sport, but yes, I want to feel comfortable giving feedback and receiving it, right? Because that's how we get better. And your lifespan as a professional athlete in the scheme of your whole working life is a relatively short thing. So you feel very privileged to be in that environment, and you want to grasp it with both hands and be as successful as you can. And you can't do it alone. It's a team sport, so you need like-minded people to be catching that wave as well. So if you can help them be better, and they can help you be better, and the coach can help you all, and you can help the coach, then you're in a great environment. And that's you won't be a million miles away if you've got a modicum of talent as a group from having a run at a championship.
Yeah, and it's something that I think I just read Gareth Southgate's book, Dear England, and he talks a lot about psychological safety, which I know it's not about being soft at all. It's about creating an environment where people can challenge each other and create vulnerability, and it becomes a strength as opposed to being it's being soft. Actually, it becomes a place where you get innovation, where you get lots of insights. And when you create environments like that, there's lots of data and research behind it all. But whether it's in a rugby team or in a business team, huge amounts of performance comes from being psychologically safe. And it's something I value as I'm a coach, so I do a lot of stuff with organizations to help them become psychologically safe. So it's good to hear it been spoken of in sport as well as just in the world of business.
For sure.
Yeah. So in 2010, you were almost forced to retire due to injury, which must have been really devastating for you. I know you're passionate about your rugby, and you continued it. And I suppose, how did you sort of reframe that almost ending into a new beginning, and just in that transition? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that transition, whether they retire injury or just retire from a sport context, and what they do next is quite a tricky thing to do, because you're not old, you're not retiring in your 50s or 60s. You're young when you do retire in sport generally. And so how did you manage that transition?
For sure. I mean, to be fair, at that point, really in the sort of 12 months leading up to that, it's funny. I watch a lot of boxing. I really enjoy boxing, and talk about fighters getting older and their legs going first, right? And I saw that, in my career as guys got older, and then all of a sudden, old age creeps up on you, and you're unable to do the things that you once took for granted. And it wasn't you need to be a little bit fitter, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's just, the body starts to give up on you. It catches up with you. So that was certainly part of it. And then I did get injured at the end, and wouldn't have been able to continue had I wanted to, but I'd had my run, put it that way. Now I'd been very fortunate as I was getting older. I'd made a decision maybe 5-6 years before that I was going to explore being a coach. And in my last contract, professional contract I'd organised, as I played less, that I would be given opportunities to coach more. And that was I feel very incredibly grateful to the Ulster CEO Michael Reid at the time, who allowed me to do that and supported me. And there were a lot of great people in the Irish Rugby Football Union and the Ulster branch that helped me and supported me in that journey over that period of time. So I'd sort of built up some skills, some experience at that point. So in practical terms, I transitioned from not playing to going into a full-time role as a head coach, director of rugby. That being said, and you sort of touched upon it, transition is hard, and it's inevitable in sport. You don't play on in rugby in your 40s, 50s, 60s. It doesn't happen. So it's something that's looming, whether it's injury or just old age or form or fitness or whatever it is. And it's very much a loss of identity. Since I was, I've been playing rugby at Bognor Rugby Club since I was 7 years old, and I was the rugby player, and then all of a sudden I wake up one morning and I'm not. I'm not the rugby player anymore. I'm never going to be the rugby player anymore, and that's tough. Even though I'd put a plan in place and the plan was working, and not without its own trials and tribulations, but it's tough. It's a real. Not to put too fine a point, it's a crisis of identity. Who am I? What am I? And you got to rebuild yourself. And I know it's not just restricted to sport or rugby. People change careers, or they come out of university, they've got to go into the working world. They get made redundant. There are many different ways that can happen, and it's doesn't make it any easier. So that was a journey in itself, obviously learning, to coach full time, because up until that point I hadn't. I'd been, putting myself out there, did a number of roles, in different environments, so I'd built up some capacity, but still to go out and do it as a full-time role where you're leading a whole program, you're doing all the planning, blah, 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 blah. It's tough. And then, to couple that with that sort of intrinsic loss of identity and sort of finding yourself again is, it was challenging. Not say it isn't, but it is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it sounds like you had a plan quite early on in terms of your next step, which is really good, obviously, in terms of how you started to almost do less playing and more sort of coaching and sort of shifting it already. But when you did get that, that flip when you went, I'm not a professional rugby player anymore. How did you manage that loss of identity? Because I agree that's the whole thing, isn't the identity piece, who you're known for, since you're 7 years old, it's a long time. What sort of things did you do to help you sort of navigate the difficulty of that, or the moments when you weren't in the spotlight or whatever it may be?
I would say I'm a great one for planning. I love, anyone knows me knows I say this a lot, start with the end in mind. So my goal was clear, to be a coach. I'd sort of tested the water out many years before and said, okay, one, do I enjoy this? Because I think life's too short to be doing things that, that doesn't make your heart sing. Too many people do that. And I think it's, I think there are better ways to live, right? And then looking to see whether I had some ability or capacity to offer something. Not everyone's a coach, right? And not everyone can be a coach. So I'd had some signals early on, and I was going through the pathway, and the coaching pathway I was still playing, and I was very, very lucky to be accommodated along that path. And I was trying different levels, coaching at schools, coaching at clubs, coaching internationally. I got a great opportunity to coach the Irish women in the year before I retired, which was an amazing experience and a great learning curve for me. So I felt confident, while I certainly didn't know everything. I mean, as yourself as a coach, it's you're always learning and refining your trade, and that just takes time. So that there was that, and setting goals about what I wanted to achieve as a coach, and one of those was, I want to, if I'm going to do this, as the saying goes, if you're not going to go all the way, why go at all? So I wanted to be a professional coach with a professional team. I wanted to go to coach in a World Cup, which is the pinnacle of the game in one respect, and So taking small bites every day, looking to get better, taking feedback from people that I trusted, having mentors, being receptive to learning, to growing, and moving forward along the planned path.
And now you've gone only done obviously coaching, but you're now obviously in the world of business now. So you're transitioned to another aspect. What's the sort of thread through it all, you think, from all of that, from what you're doing?
Well, I think I touched upon a couple of things. Having a growth mindset, being open to learn, explore, and cross-pollinate ideas. Often, you can improve in one area of your life if you step outside of that microcosm and see how different people solve maybe not the same but similar problems in different areas of business or life or sport or whatever. So that's one thing. And then also doing things that make your heart sing. I've always been very lucky and feel very privileged to do things that I enjoy doing, that I think are worthwhile. And I think that, that's a great way to live. I wouldn't want to live any other way. And, so that certainly helps. And sort of moving to the States showed me a very, very different aspect of sport. I mean, this is the mecca for professional sport. It's like a $9 billion a year, I think, business, across professional sport. It's huge. And so it's very much a business mindset here. So that over that, previous X amount of years, you're sort of learning from people that are bringing different aspects from it that are outside of the purely technical, tactical coaching side of it. It's much more expansive, I would say. So I was learning things along the way, and that, I was recruited to come to Houston to build a professional franchise for a new professional league, and that involved much more than just coaching or recruiting players and putting systems in place. I was involved with pretty much every aspect of the business. So that was came back to that sort of growth mindset, and and looking and learning and asking for help, and engaging with people that could mentor me, and so on and so forth. So that was really the sort of transitional piece to sort of segue into business, because I hadn't really given it much thought, to be honest with you. There's a certain amount you're dealing with budgets when you're dealing with facilities, player salaries, contract negotiations, so on and so forth. I mean, there are elements of all of that which you would sort of put under the business umbrella, but there was so much more to that, and it was an opportunity that you don't get to have in Europe, because they have a very much a different approach to sport here. And sure, let's have a professional team here in this particular sport, and it's just built up from nothing. Whereas we used to rugby and football clubs that have been around 150 years. So there's nobody around that was part of that process. That's very different. I find that very exciting, and that was a great learning curve to learn different things that sort of catapulted me into a different direction in my life.
Yeah, it's interesting that in the US there's more of a sort of business mindset, I guess, going on in the context of sport as well, which is almost those two things colliding. Probably some of the big clubs here, football clubs, there's a lot of that going on, but you're obviously getting exposed to that, which is obviously brilliant and nice for getting into that world of new transition for you.
For sure. And if talking about football, soccer, I find it fascinating the rise of soccer here in North America. You've currently got, if you look at the 50 top valuations of professional teams, franchises in the world, 19 of them are here in North America. Yet the game's really only, the MLS has only really been around since 94, 95 after the Soccer World Cup. So a relatively short runway to build wouldn't necessarily, and I'm not a soccer guy, so just my opinion, but not necessarily the same standard as what we'd be used to in the Premiership, for example. But the valuations and the business of sport of those teams is right up there.
It's interesting, isn't it? Very much business orientated, which you're in that world now. Just one last question for you. So the sort of conversation around mental health and sport obviously is now evolved, which is brilliant. So how do you think the relationship between mental resilience and mental health, or are they the same thing? Is there a difference, or are they the sort of same thing?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, but I would say they're linked. I wouldn't necessarily say they're the same thing, but I think often as men we and it's not just restricted to men, but we're dudes, so let's talk about that. That we're not always communicative about things we're going through, and I think if and it's a spread on from what we follow on from what we talked about earlier, being comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, right? So it's probably easier, in a sporting context, once you've sort of set the culture and environment so that, the people feel safe enough to talk about what they did wrong, rather than sitting there and hope nobody notices it on the video, or you to give me feedback, or me to give you feedback, or the coach to give us feedback. And it's just a natural progression from there in terms of how can we help each other when we're going through stuff? Because life's full of different seasons. There's all sorts of problems that we have to deal with, often unseen. And as a coach or as a teammate, you want to have an environment there where if someone's having problems at home, whatever they are, or whatever those problems are, that they can feel comfortable speaking about them, so that we can deal with them together, right? that's just practical from a very sterilized way of we want the team to do as best as possible, but then there's a human element to that I don't want to see you suffering, and if you sharing that problem and I can help, even if it's just listening, well then we want to get to a stage where you feel comfortable doing that, so we can move forward together and be successful together.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, with mental health is that, certainly with men anyway, particularly because we're not the best at talking to each other and sharing things. And I think that having those open conversations, as you say, because life is difficult at times, and there's stuff going on in our worlds and we need those people around us as guys to actually be able to share that. And we know that's really important of moving that forward. And it's creating those environments, those. I've got some buddies, business colleagues. We have like an accountability thing, and we share. When we're having some tough moments, with our business, some high moments, we celebrate together. We go out together. We have curry together, have beers together. But I know if I'm having a tough day, I can just call on them, and they don't have to solve it all. I can just share. I can share those thoughts, and it's okay.
100%, and that's brilliant, and and I think that's incredibly important. And I think about it, go back to the sporting context. We spoke about feeling comfortable if a friend is missing multiple tackles a game. Is that a technical issue? Is that a tactical issue? Is he not understanding the system or where he's supposed to be? Is that an athletic issue? Is he not fit enough to get in position to make those tackles, etc., etc.? Well, if we take the converse part of the conversation we had earlier, we spoke about feeling comfortable and saying, hey, okay, let's find a solution together, as your teammate or coach player. Well, if we all just bury it because, Julian's a great guy and, it's only that part of the game and we don't really want to talk about it. He might be uncomfortable. He might be embarrassed about it, blah, blah, blah. And we just brush it under the carpet. Well, what happens? It doesn't get better. It gets worse, and in the same way, in terms of what you talked about there, if you don't engender a culture where people can feel like they can notice or share what they're seeing or feeling, depending on on which, then those problems don't go away. They multiply, they get worse. And as I said, I like that Churchill thing: if it's not fatal, it's not final. And even if it seems overwhelming in that moment, sharing it and putting together a simple plan can often put it to bed, or at least be the start of something positive that deals with it, if that makes sense.
I agree, totally, absolutely, yeah. And I think just that sometimes the relief sometimes of sharing stuff, isn't it? The relief of that can be really helpful to move forward. Really, thank you for your time, Justin. Really appreciate that. Thank you for the insights. Thank you for the insight into the world of rugby, but also how the parallels can really affect and impact the world of business. And that's what you're doing right now as well. So you're sort of bouncing between the two of them. Wonderful. If anybody wants to connect or get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Probably the best way is on LinkedIn. So Justin M. Fitzpatrick. Love to chat and connect with anyone with similar interests, or wants help or advice.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you, Julian. Thank you for having me.